How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. We were just talking about music and Toronto bands before we started the interview, you and I. Who's the band for Sex Bomb? Who was that band?
That was Beck. Beck
Oh,
did those
cool.
songs. And in fact, that song that you just played always blows my mind because he basically, over the course of a weekend, me and Nigel Godrich, who produced the soundtrack, had been talking about different bands. And we did have, a bunch of Canadian artists in it, Metric, Broken Social Scene, Pid Koala. And we were talking about different bands for Sex Bomb, and one of them fell through, and Nigel just said, "You should just ask Beck. He would do this brilliantly." And he did over the course of a weekend. I got a CD back in the days when people used to burn CDRs. I got this CD of like 24 tracks that he'd recorded over the weekend. And that one that you just played, I mean, he never redid it basically. It was like a demo, and him and his drummer just kind of improv'd that tune and never did a second take of it. And Nigel was the one who said, "I don't know why you would want to re-record this. I mean, this is as good as Sex Bomb could possibly hope to be. Why
Yeah.
would you do a second take?" So whenever I hear that in the film, it's always wild to me, thinking like, that is the only take of that song.
That's the demo. That's
That
what
is
he.
the demo.
Wow.
That is literally the demo.
I was a good age for this film when it came out, but I was in my 20s when this film came out. But all my friends were obsessed with it. And I didn't know, and this is a weird thing to say to you, I didn't know it didn't really work out. Like I thought it was just this cult film that's always been this great cult film. I didn't know that when it first came out, it didn't do as well.
The head of marketing at Universal, Michael Moses, sent me this email on Monday morning after it came out. And it was the sort of the best email I've ever had from the studio, where the email just said three words. It just said, "Years, not days." And I thought that was like the best, like, because usually, like, usually if something doesn't do well, you don't hear anything from anybody. Like, and to get that email from him and just say "years, not days," I was like, I feel you, and I thank you for that. I appreciate it. Listen, I mean, it's a tough thing because obviously, as a filmmaker, you sort of have and a producer of the movie as well. You have a responsibility to like it making its money back. But then on the flip side, as a film fan, we all know about so many films that are considered, I'm not saying Scott Pilgrim's a classic, but like so many films that are considered classics or cult classics were not hits in their day.
When did you start getting the notion? Is there a phone call to you that says, "Hey man, this thing it's starting to happen in a different way"?
I think what happened is that there were cinemas across the country that started sort of programming it. The ones I remember, because we were all in Los Angeles at that time, was like the New Beverly, the one that Quentin Tarantino sort of owns now, and the New Art. They started playing it at midnight. And what would happen is that over the course of like maybe the next year, whenever it would show at the New Beverly, it would sort of be an excuse for the whole cast and me to get back together. So sometimes there would be midnights of Scott Pilgrim, and the entire cast would be there. I think somebody's got a photo of like all of us on stage, including like Chris Evans and Brie Larson and Michael and Aubrey and Anna Kendrick and the whole gang. So that was something where, again, it was something where you just felt like you had to keep getting the word out.
I can only imagine there's some vindication now. I mean, now that we're here to talk about this new series, that people are reaching out to you, and my understanding is you got a call that said, like, is there anything more that we can do with Scott Pilgrim? There has to be some sort of vindication there.
When it's something where it's like, by the amount of Blu-ray reissues or the soundtrack being reissued or the game being re-released or there being, new steelbooks and all that kind of stuff and T-shirts and endless merch to sign off on, you think, okay, this is obviously not a red ink item for Universal because there's obviously like, it just keeps on going and there keep being screenings. And I think also probably because the cast, like there were some people in the film that were already famous. And then there was a point where like everybody in the film is super famous and would continue to keep blowing up. So it kept being that film that has everybody in it. Like, sort of, I think when you watch it now and you look at the opening titles and you see the list of names, you're like, holy,
I watched it last night to get ready for this. And Anna Kendrick, as you mentioned, Brie Larson, Chris Evans, Jason Schwartzman, Aubrey Plaza, Karen Culkin. It's a lot of, I guess, star power in a film. I guess at the moment you didn't know that these people were going to end up becoming these very big stars.
Well, that's a credit to the casting directors. I mean, it was like I had, like Alison Jones was the lead casting director, and then in New York, Jen Houston, and then in Toronto, Robin Cook. And, we just saw like everybody that was, new and up and coming. And some of those people, like Aubrey Plaza, I met her in New York and she did an audition and she was great. And then we flew her to LA to do a second audition. And when she flew to LA, she booked Scott Pilgrim, her first film, and in the same week also booked Parks and Recreation and Funny People.
Wow.
And it was like, so Aubrey like went from like no like roles in film and TV to 3 in the same week. And I remember like Brie Larson's audition when she was 19 years old and we shot the movie. And I remember her audition vividly because it was like exactly what she does in the film. And it was so strong a take and so funny and sort of, really distinctive. It is one of those things when somebody leaves the room and you're like, she is in the movie. She's amazing. Oh my God, So I remember all of those, everybody's auditions. And, people that were sort of more already established, like Michael obviously had already done Arrested Development and Juno and Superbad, and Chris Evans had been in a bunch of movies, but I think hadn't, like I really wanted to tap into, like he's so funny. And he's so funny in like Scott Pilgrim sending himself up, and I knew he had that in him, and that was just fun to do. So it was the cast is just incredible,
I mean, Judd Apatow said this thing to me one time that I was asking him a little bit about Freaks and Geeks, and he said that from then on, whenever he would watch a movie with Seth Rogen in it or Busy Phillips in it, he would just get so proud just to see them their careers kind of continuing. Did you ever feel that? Did you ever watch Succession or The White Lotus and go like, geez, there they are, I remember them?
Oh no, totally. I mean, I think also with Kieran as well, it's like Kieran is one of those people who like is, kind of, does what he loves. He's not somebody who kind of like works a lot. So I think with Kieran, even before he did Scott Pilgrim, it's like I'd seen him in Igby Goes Down, and it's like this guy's amazing. Like, and he didn't work as much as maybe he, like could, just because he was quite picky, and so. Like he nearly steals the show in Scott Pilgrim. So when Succession came along and he's, he really blows up, I was just like, oh, finally. Like, it's like, because it's like, we all know he's a superstar and it's just waiting to find the vehicle where Kieran can just kind of like explode and be brilliant. So, I mean, I'm proud, but I'm also not surprised. I mean, somebody like Aubrey is another person who I think has continued to kind of, do really diverse work and in drama as well as comedy. And she was amazing in Emily Criminal a couple of years ago as well as like White Lotus. So yeah, I do follow everybody, and we all keep in touch, like, so it's like, it's just a sort of a family that's kept on rumbling,
One of the great things about the film, even watching it now, is that it's so very Toronto. And I made a joke that I said, like, it's Toronto for Toronto's sake and not like cheap Philadelphia. You have no idea how many times I walk outside of the CBC here on Front Street and I see like 3 New York cabs, and I just know that's someone shooting New York down the road from me in Toronto. Was there any pressure to not do that? Was there any pressure to not be Toronto?
I don't think anybody ever said, does it have to be in Canada? Why can't it be in the States? Nobody said that, but there was a point in the pre-production where one of the other producers, Mark Platt, asked, is there a world where you would consider shooting in New York and making it look like Toronto? And I was like, no. I said, that just sounds insane. No. So that did happen at one point. And there's lots of in jokes in the movie. There's one bit where when they're making the Lucas Lee movie up at Casa Loma, you see the New York skyline on on a backdrop, and when he kicks like Michael Cera through the backdrop, behind the Empire State Building is the CN Tower.
Yeah.
Like, so you see it just really briefly. The first time I came to Toronto was in 2004 when I was doing press for Shaun of the Dead. Prior to that, my experience of Toronto on screen was was either in films, mostly the films of David Cronenberg, where he uses Toronto like to great effect, usually making it look quite ominous and scary and wintry.
Yeah.
You never get the sunny
No.
Toronto in
No, you
David
never get the
Cronenberg.
summer beach Toronto in David
No.
Cronenberg's film. No.
It's definitely the wintry institutes, like The Brood or something like that, or Shivers.
Do you remember any good stories about your time shooting this film in Toronto? Something that stayed with you?
It felt very magical in that we were shooting in the locations that were in the books. So Brian had drawn like Toronto locations. I'm really trying really hard to drop that second T, which is the mistake that people not from Canada make.
Oh, listen, I'm from Newfoundland, and I say Toronto, and I get roasted for it all the time. So you're in good company.
I'm really trying. I'm dropping that second T for you.
Yeah, right. You're like Drake.
But I think the thing is that the cast were already young, and it was this weird thing where we were hanging out outside of the movie in the same locations that are in the movie. And so that started to be very like not strange but sort of magical, where it's like, you know, like around Bloor and Bathurst, like Sonic Boom and like the Bloor, which is now called something else now, is it Hot Docs or something?
Yeah, the Hot Docs cinema, yeah.
And you know, and like Lee's Palace and all of those places, and all of the places like the Communist's Daughter and stuff. Like it was just that funny thing where the film and the locations the film locations and where we were hanging out in reality started to blur together. And so it was a really sort of beautiful thing. And also because a lot of the Toronto bands were involved in the film, like Metric and Broken Social Scene, and Chris Murphy from Sloan was the on-set like musical like technician director, like helping the actors with their instruments.
He had to make sure the actors looked authentic with the guitars and basses in their hands.
One of my things I'll never forget is that, so some of the actors played instruments before, like Michael Cera plays guitar really well. Mark Webber and Alison Pill had to learn their instruments, and Chris Murphy was dressed. He was also, sometimes he would be like a hand double or a foot double for Mark Webber as Stephen Stills. And so Chris Murphy from Sloan was dressed in the same costume as Mark Webber. And I remember like when we're shooting the opening scene of the song, I just remember Chris Murphy standing by the camera going like, C, D, you know, doing basically like, so like Mark could just copy what he was doing. So it was like all of that side of it, like literally having a member of Sloan on the crew, like helping the cast. And then, you know, when we were shooting at Lee's Palace, we built a set of the interior. And so both like members of Metric and Broken Social Scene came down and were sort of like dumbfounded that there was this replica of Lee's Palace on a soundstage. So all of that stuff was just made it very like, the whole thing sort of felt like a weird Russian dolls kind of like thing of just, we were living in the film, you know?
You have so many devoted fans, like, you know, friends of mine who are into film, whenever I tell them that you're coming on the show, they're always very, very exciting. We've been working on a bit of a theory as to the reason people become so dedicated to your films. I think your films have so many fans for a lot of different reasons, but one is that you can see in them that you are a film fan. And when you go on Instagram, you can see yourself geeking out over other people's work. So who were those, A, what do you think of my theory, but B, who were you admiring when you were a young filmmaker? It's
always about your formative years, because obviously when, you know, literally the first film I saw at the cinema when I was 3 or 4 was Star Wars. And so obviously in that early stage when my mum and dad would take me and my brother to mostly genre films. So at that point it was like Spielberg and Lucas and, you know, so any like sci-fi, fantasy, anything like that. But then I guess when I was a teenager, I think that the people that I gravitated towards, that I just sort of started to understand that they were, if not auteurs, but they had a particular idiosyncrasies about their work. And the 3 that I can think of that around that time would be like Joe Dante, John Carpenter, and John Landis, like where I'd really just kind of like really want to see all of their films and was kind of fascinated about the trademarks that they had in them. And then I guess a bit later, other like real mind blowers for me, as in my later teens, when I'm thinking about wanting to be a director, would be the Coen brothers or Sam Raimi, and then And then later again, when I'm really want to make a low budget movie, it's like people like Quentin Tarantino and Peter Jackson and Robert Rodriguez, all the sort of people who are outside Hollywood, like making movies or making, sort of like breaking into it in some unconventional way. So I think like, and obviously like classic filmmakers as well, like Sergio Leone and Hitchcock and, Stanley Kubrick, all the sort of classics. But I think in terms of the people that I would sort of like gravitate towards, there were these kind of filmmakers who had trademarks. I really like that.
What did you like about because you're a filmmaker who has trademarks. What did you like about the idea of a filmmaker having trademarks?
I mean, like John Carpenter, it's like the way that he shoots in kind of like scope or his scores or even just the font that he uses in all of his films. Or like, like Joe Dante would always have Dick Miller, the actor, in all of his films. Or like John Landis would always have like a look to the camera. Somebody would always look to the camera in a John Landis film. Or, his use of pop music. American Wealth in London, I think, is like one of the like films with like a pop music soundtrack that really like made me sit up straight and think, okay, that's amazing. Obviously everybody does it now, but back then it was like really startling,
Yeah. Did you know when you started making films what you wanted your trademarks to be?
Not really. I guess in a way, part of it was about directing comedy in an energetic way. Because most TV comedy at the time, and like not so much now, like, but at the time, like the conventional wisdom was to shoot comedy pretty straight and let the performers do the work and just kind of sit back and just record that. And that would be with a lot of classic comedies or TV comedy, the way that it would go. And then you would get something like Raising Arizona, where it's like super like adrenalized, or even like Martin Scorsese's like After Hours, like where again, it's like, it's a comedy, but the way it's directed is like really energetic. So I think that was a big inspiration to me, that I wanted to sort of do comedy films that were as, kind of cared as much about the visuals as they did about the performances.
When you got a chance to meet some of these filmmakers who were formative to you, I know you've interviewed Scorsese. I know you spent time with Tarantino. I read that
I had breakfast with Joe Dante the other day.
Holy moly! And Del Toro, didn't Guillermo del Toro give you some like when you've spoken to some of these filmmakers who were formative for you, or just meaningful to you? What's the best piece of advice one of them has given you?
I think a lot of people, the advice is what I would say to other people is about, like stay intact and be yourself and don't kind of like conform, because obviously going to Hollywood and making Hollywood films is something where, like the idea of like selling out is also just about not being yourself anymore. And I think, I've had periods where people have given me advice to sort of say, like anybody could make this movie, only you can make the next Edgar Wright movie. And I would give the same advice to young filmmakers when they would say, what advice would you give to young filmmakers? I would say, do what you want to do. Don't do what you think you ought to do. Because like a film that's sincere in any way, even if it doesn't have to be a personal film, it could be a horror film, but like make it with sincerity, like you actually want to make this film. This is the kind of film you enjoy. Not just that you're making a film because that's the kind of thing that would do well.
Edgar, always a pleasure whenever you come on, and it was great to watch the show. I mean, I live in the Annex, and it was lovely to see Honest Ed's, which is now shut down, which has now been torn down.
Emma told me that the Pizza on Bloor and Bathurst is also gone, which is a stake in the heart.
I've been a long time since I've been to that Pizza, but I walk outside to the set of Scott Pilgrim every day, and it's a joy for me. Thanks so much for making the time, man. I appreciate it.